Please excuse the subpar audio in this show. I am not excited about it either. But I'm really glad to have Kitty Piercy on the show. Thank you for listening. Yeah.
This podcast was recorded on April 18th, 2020. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and people outside the binary. This is Less Stupid with Thomas Hiura, the show that's completely uncut, uncensored, and unbelievably excited to have former mayor of Eugene, Kitty Piercy, on the show today.
Hello.
Hi there. I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, but I also want to just tell the people that you were a three-term representative in the Oregon State House of Representatives, served as House Minority Leader with the Democratic Party. Then in 2004, you were elected for your first term as mayor of Eugene. You served 12 years until 2017. What else is true about you besides all those facts and figures?
Let's see. I was a teacher for many years. People don't know that. I got involved in politics not because I wanted to run for office, but because I was doing volunteer work like everybody else does. And I was an activist on women's rights issues. And I was asked by a state representative if I would consider running for office. And I had never thought of it, but I did consider it for almost a year, and said I would give it a whirl. So that's the beginning of my career in politics.
That's awesome. Well, I have a little bit of experience as an educator also, so I just love seeing people who have had that experience. And I think that if we could only get more people in Congress who are maybe a little more experienced in educating and having dialogue and maybe less about being lawyers.
I always thought, Thomas, that it's also true that you learn a lot of skills about how to have kids go get what they want without fighting and basic things like that. That sounds so corny, but it's
Sure.
really true. You hone a lot of skills to help people get what they want in a productive and good way. And I've used that many times, and as a representative and as mayor. So
Awesome. I am glad to hear that. Well, the question I always start out when I chat with people for this show is, what is a controversial opinion that you hold about anything at all?
Well, it seems like to me there was nothing but controversy the whole time I was in office.
Sure.
In Eugene, and I'll talk about the mayor's role first. In Eugene, there's nothing more controversial than land use issues.
Right.
And it brings out people who want to keep the status quo and people who want to do something different. And they're very vocal about their opinions. And those kind of things go on every time we have a major development proposal or a expansion of the UGB or any of those things that cause so much fraught activity in our community. And I think you really have to be someone, and I believe I was pretty good at that, is that you don't think your opinion is the only one in town, that you believe it's important to listen to everybody. And even with people you disagree with, there's elements of truth and elements of things that you should take into consideration and make part of your own.
I think that that's a great point. And it's certainly something that's been discussed at the state level as well, with Speaker Kotek wanting to declare a state of emergency that would effectively allow different zones to be used for sheltering more quickly.
So that's another big controversial issue, of course, and I know it's one that you are have a great concern about too. Housing, all kinds of housing, affordable housing for every level of income, and of course, folks who don't have any housing at all has been a long time issue in our community, and one that I spent my whole 12 years as mayor working diligently on and trying to do it in a productive way and trying hard to help the community understand they didn't need to want to avert their eyes to people who are homeless, that they really wanted to understand that they're community. They need our attention just like everybody else in our community. And by the way, they're just as varied as every other group in our community, good, bad, and in all points in between, because they're just human beings. And so I spent a lot of time trying to find ways to move us as a community towards some solutions that wouldn't make everybody crazy. And that's how we ended up trying Opportunity Village and the community supported shelters. Is they were sort of unique and innovative ways to get our community in the door of providing a different kind of shelter for folks. And so I feel really proud of Square One for the work that they've done on Opportunity Village and Emerald Village, and I'm very proud of community sort of supported shelters, which is, innovatively done these little shelters for people that I think they're up past 100 of those around the community now. So I also think it's brought down some of the tension people have about homeless folks. I actually think this pandemic has caused people to maybe make some big advances in this, and I will watch and see. It is my hope out of all of this horrible stuff that people will see that it's not in your interest or my interest or anybody's interest for people to live out on the streets where they don't have access to basic health care and all of those kinds of things. So I don't care if you're a selfish person or you're a very compassionate person. There's good reasons for you to want to see that everybody has their shelter needs, their housing needs met, because it makes a better community for all of us.
Right on. I certainly can appreciate that. And I also appreciate what you said about people having varied opinions and how they all have weight and have importance in the community. And so there is sort of an opinion that I want to get your sort of response to here sometimes, which is that, Eugene has led the way in terms of having a whole lot of nonprofits per capita, in terms of having a whole varied level of the degree of resources for people when it comes to public and private funded resources for sheltering. But some people would probably say something like it's because it is a place where people can access so many kinds of resources, it can end up attracting people who aren't from Eugene, but who come into being unhoused in their lives through whatever of the many situations that can lead to being unhoused, and they end up coming to Eugene and kind of creating maybe a culture in some cases where that's seen as something where well Eugene is the place to be if you're living that lifestyle or experience. And what do you think about that?
I have a whole lot of reactions to that. One, no matter where you live in this country, you're an American. And we have responsibilities to each other. Eugene certainly can't carry the burden for the whole country, and it doesn't. That homelessness is widespread.
Sure, especially throughout the West Coast. Yes,
and I think we are, our Constitution is different than a lot of Oregon's Constitution is different. People are guaranteed by our state constitution the right to be here. You can't just put somebody out of the community if you don't want them here. You can't. The public sidewalks are public. That's in the Constitution. That's right. Not something our city made up or did. It's just the truth. I will say, for the benefit of anybody who's listening, that I think you have to recognize that Eugene is where the county seat is. It's where Lane County's government is located. And that means that's where all the services are located. So if you live in this very huge county that goes all the way from here over to the coast, big as Rhode Island, well, the services for those folks are here. So, sure. So you just have to bear that in mind. That's our civic responsibility. It's what we were assigned to do when we put our government together. Sometimes it's uncomfortable what you have to deal with. Sometimes you're sort of overwhelmed with a balance of trying to be kind, but also keep a good and healthy community. These are not easy or light things to do, but they're important things to struggle with. And there's nothing wrong with struggling with things that need to be made better. I mean, that's
Sure.
part of being a human being, I think, is that you have to think as humans, we're always going to have things we have to work on. And
Sure.
we'll always need people who are willing to work on those things and try to improve it for all of us.
Right on. Well, one thing that Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti has said is that LA is a victim of its own success, in that it's a very desirable destination. It's a place where a lot of people want to be.
It's also warm.
Exactly. It's warm. I went to college in Minnesota. It was unfathomable to be living on the street there in the winter.
That's the way it is in a lot of the country. In fact, in Alaska, I believe it's against the law to go unsheltered.
Wow. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know that you are an alumnus of Western Michigan University, and I don't know that much about your background before moving to Eugene, but can you talk about what brought you to Eugene, when you moved here, etc.?
Long time ago. We came in about around 73, so that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And the path here was that I graduated from college with a degree in education, and at that time I joined the Peace Corps, and I was a very shy girl and very lacked confidence, I think, because I'd never been.
Oh, I think you overcame that for sure.
And so for me to make a decision to join the Peace Corps and go to Africa in the early 60s was a pretty outrageous move on the part for this kid. I'd hardly been anywhere, and but it was a wonderful opportunity to learn how to appreciate other cultures, to learn that I live in a world and not just in the United States, to learn that other places and people matter all over this world and have a lot to contribute. And
you used the word cultures, which is plural, and Africa being a massively large and diverse continent. Where were you in Africa when you were doing your service?
So when I was in the Peace Corps, I was also teaching English. It was at the time when Haile Selassie had opened up education for the people of Ethiopia. So many of my students had come from being shepherds, and they were older. This was their first chance to have any education. So it was a wonderful experience to get to know them and work with them. I also had the experience of going out into the jungle and giving inoculations to people. That I did that during one of my breaks. I also volunteered with lepers and people who had tuberculosis, and then one of the fun stories, of course, is that on our vacation, we didn't make much money, but didn't take as much.
Sure.
I went to the west coast of Africa. There were about 5 of us who went, and we hitchhiked along the coast of West Africa from Nairobi to Dahomey to Ghana, Dahomey, Ivory Coast, all the way up to the Ivory Coast.
Cameroon? Did you go through Cameroon?
No, I didn't.
Okay. All right.
But it was a wonderful experience, and where we ended up, there'd be music and people that welcomed you. It was before all the big wars that were there, so it was right after a lot of Africa had just come out of the colonial period. So they were very hopeful, and they really thought this was going to be the birth of a democratic continent. And you see how things have been mixed there like everywhere else, but for me it was just an amazing time. In many ways my life has been an amazing time, because in my lifetime was the Vietnam War movement, the women's movement, the civil rights movement. All of these things have been part of my growing up experience and go into making my
That's fantastic. Well, I want to ask you, because you're getting into a little bit of history. and because I am, focused a lot on Eugene, and I want to know, because you have been so involved in our community, are there particular like historical figures or maybe sort of untold, lesser known stories about this community that that stand out to you when we're talking about Eugene?
I'll tell you one. Is not like about a historical figure, and it's not a big shiny thing, but I think it's really true.
That's great.
That this community has been made from people who are in the education community. That's sort of the door of the university. And it's been made by the extraction companies. And that would be sand and gravel and forestry and all of that. And so you've had these two important parts of our community growing up side by side. And in fact, if you think about the major buildings in such as the halls and so forth in our community, they were built from extraction dollars.
Sure.
And so about 4 years before I became mayor, I was asked to join this group of people who were trying to change conversation in Eugene. And it was some from the business community and some from the environmental community. It was really trying to, I think, prep us for a broader discussion about the urban growth boundary. But it was a really good discussion, because what I learned from that is some of these folks who families had been in the extraction businesses, which we kind of, from my sort of point of view, you don't always like some of the things they do, that they feel like their families have spent hundreds of years contributing and aren't appreciated for what they have contributed to the community. And then we had other people around the table who felt like, yeah, but I've been here trying to protect this place and keep it the kind of place we all love. And I don't think I feel like you've been appreciative of what I have to offer. And so I thought it was a brilliant understanding for me of why some of these pitched battles in our community happen. It's because when Eugene started, they had it's always been that way. They had big fights over whether the OSU would be the big institution or U of O. And that was a big fight, and it went all the way to the state legislature, and it ended up with U of O. And then the same thing happened with the railroad. There's a huge fight over where the railroad would be, Springfield or here, and right. Yes. So we have this history of rambunctious discussions about major issues, and I, as mayor, kind of learned how to see it that way. That these are just, sometimes it can be harsh, but these are just active citizens really working hard to try to preserve what they think is important. They just come from different points of view. They just come from different places. They see the world through different lenses, and we have to. It's beholden, especially to people who are in leadership positions, to really kind of grasp that and make room for it, and to not bite on every nasty thing that comes your way, because they will come. And you have to, one of the things that I did, I think is a little entertaining, is I did not ever want to have a disagreement at city council meeting end up with the police having to be called in or have somebody taken out. I just thought that's not a very productive thing not a very good civic thing to have happen.
Was there any historical precedent for that? Did that happen in the past?
It happened all over. In fact, when I first came in as mayor, the council before me, they get so mad at each other, they throw sandwiches at each other. I mean,
really?
Yeah. So anyway, I thought about it hard, and I learned maybe I learned this part as a parent, but mostly as a teacher. I suggested to the council, I think they thought I was nuts at first, that if somebody wouldn't follow the rules, when somebody gets disruptive, you ask them to stop. And if they won't, then what options do you have? I suppose you could argue with them. I suppose you could have somebody come in and take them out. But I suggested that instead of them being taken out, that we would leave.
Yeah.
Because that they're there for an audience. So the thing that cool it down is for us to leave and come back when things settle down. So I only had to use that twice in 12 years. Once with some friends and once with a person who was a little loose in the behavioral department. But anyway.
Well, I wouldn't normally compare your leadership to that of the current president, but I did see in a recent press conference, he threatened the same thing. Of course, he is very aggressive and doesn't seem to like journalists bringing up facts and figures about the death count. But he basically said that. He said, well, if you won't stop talking, I'll just leave and you'll have to deal with all these people.
Well, I hate to, as you know, I don't particularly enjoy being.
Yeah. Well, at least what I can say for you is you did it well before him. So, you probably.
Well, what I would say is I was trying to avoid conflict. I was trying to make room for things to settle down in a peaceful way. It wasn't in our president's case. Lots of times it's seen as punishment. I didn't see it as punishment. I saw it as the most peaceful way I could think of us being able to go about our business and to not embarrass anybody or denigrate anybody.
Well, I appreciate that. There's a lot of great stuff in what you said. I mean, when I think about the extraction dollars funding facilities that are now beloved, I mean, Wow Hall, Woodworkers of the World, I believe, and now, that's like the coolest venue to see. I've seen Frank Black from the Pixies there. I've seen, I think Weird Al Yankovic made it come through there before he was playing it
several times.
Yeah, so tons of great artists there. And I want to ask you, because I do this is like an informal podcast kind of thing, and I like to ask musicians what their feelings are about politics. Sometimes they're taken aback, but I also like to ask people who are in political influence about music. And so this has been a challenging time for us to be isolated in our homes if we have them. And have you been listening to any music or appreciating any music recently that has been helping you through this challenge?
I probably can't give you names. I like all.
Bummer.
I know. I'm a very eclectic person, though, and so I really like I like a lot of different kinds. I like show tunes. I like classic. I like some jazz. I like blues. I like. Maybe I haven't acquired a taste for hip hop, but that may be generational.
Bummer. Yeah, sure. No, it totally is. I mean, I put on a hip hop beat and I asked my dad to rap to it, and he's like a lifelong musician, a rock musician, and he stares at me blankly. He's like, this is not even in my vocabulary.
Right.
But for example,
I like to have music going most of the time because it just kind of is. It either energizes or soothes or whatever you need, and sometimes it just can fill you with joy when you need to be filled with joy too. And
can I push you to just name one artist that you've been enjoying, whether it's recently or just that you've loved in your life?
This is so old-fashioned, but I will just say James Taylor. I love James Taylor.
Awesome. James
I like folk. I mean, I grew up on folk, so I like folk.
Did you catch Neil Young when he came through Matt Night Arena last year?
I did see James Taylor at that's the only time I've gone to something other than something that I had to show up for at Matthew Night Arena. It was lovely, but it was so huge. It feels so it feels so distant.
It does. It does. And when they first built it, of course, it's Eugene and they built for growth. But, the basketball and volleyball teams were having a tremendous challenge filling that place up. And it's not that fun to play in front of an arena that's 15%, 20% full.
Well, those basketball girls really did it, didn't they?
I know. It was just amazing. If you look year by year, like 2,000 people average attendance, 4,000, 7,000, and then you get like 20,000. It's just, it's amazing. Did you ever catch any of those games?
I follow them. I didn't.
Sure.
I didn't go, but I have everybody I know does, and I think I'm just. I have to say, having been there when it got put in place that women would be treated equally to men in the sports arena, which has not really happened. But we're in a period now where they're just blowing through it. They are more fun to watch than just about any other team or any other sport. So that's a big step forward for women, and I really appreciate it. And more than that, I appreciate the style.
Yes. Well, I think there's a greater emphasis on teamwork.
Yeah.
You have your big stars, Ionescu, Sabali, Hebert, but there's a real fundamentals of the game and working together, which is
yes, and it feels like it matters to them that they like each other and that they help each other shine, which is a very good characteristic to have, I think. So it's been a I'm sorry they got shortened in terms of making it to the end, but I think they've made it as far as you can go in terms of the sport right now. So
champions in our hearts, for sure.
That's right.
Well, you certainly shined in 3 successful terms as mayor, and I know that you are still occasionally involved, well, quite involved, for example, in leading City Club of Eugene forums sometimes. You've been a surrogate for Jamie McLeod Skinner, who's running for Secretary of State. Has it been a challenge going from being, the figurehead of the city to being a regular private citizen like anybody else? What's the transition been like for you?
Well, first of all, I want to say I always thought of myself as a regular citizen. Anyway,
when I used to see you at Saturday Market.
That's right. I always took myself as being one of the people, and so and that worked for me really well. It made me happy to approach the job that way. About 2 years before I stepped down, I just started to prepare myself mentally. This is going to happen. You want what comes on the other side of this to work really well. What do you need to put in place for yourself? How do you adjust to it? How do you go from a job that asks 60 hours a week from you to not being asked to do anything? I mean, it's really, and I also made a big commitment in my, not that I was asked to, but I made a big commitment to Lucy that I would stay out of her face for a couple of years, that I would let her get her own legs as mayor. And I don't think it's easy to get your own legs as mayor if the former mayor is hanging around very much. So I really tried hard to stay out. I was always available if she wanted to ask me something or somebody wanted to talk, but I just stayed because I just wanted to be fair. I wanted to be fair. And then, of course, with the political season, every candidate's been talking to me, as you know, and I'm on the board of Square One, and I'm on the board of the City Club. So I keep my fingers in a lot of stuff, but I don't have. I'm now in a phase where I do what I want to do, as opposed to what I have to do, and so that's very. But I'm very appreciative and honored for the 12 years I was mayor. Had a fantastic array of experiences. Worked on things that I cared so deeply about, from climate change to how we handle our public discussions to how we try to do better with our homeless and housing situation. None of these things are totally resolved because they're ongoing. Sure. But I really tried to make a sizable contribution in a positive way. I was mayor. And I felt that's what I was what I was there for. So, and it gave me a lot of, I went to China for the second climate summit. And I would never have had the chance to do that if I hadn't worked on that issue and been mayor. And I was one of 20 mayors in the United States who went, and there were about 40 Chinese mayors, and Kerry was there, and it was and he told us that this
Secretary of State John Kerry.
Yeah, and he told us that we needed to really do a good job while we were there, because that was the one area where China and the United States were getting along and working together as partners within the climate issues. So we needed to really step up our game. So that was a really very interesting experience, and it was interesting in many ways. The Chinese couldn't believe we had public process. They just thought that was They said that must just be terrible. How do you get anything done? And I observed that when they gave their presentations on what they were doing for climate, orders would come from on high. Everybody will plant hundreds and thousands and millions of trees. Okay, that's what happens. And when you see the reports from all the mayors, they're all very similar, because they've all been told to do the same things, and they've all got the same trajectory. But I mean, there's good and bad to that, because they don't have.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my half my family is Japanese, and so I understand, the East Asian culture of. It's not even seen as like we have this, like, when we say the word authoritarian here, it comes with especially in Eugene, it comes with a real negative stigma.
Right.
But there, I mean, they recognize it as just, this is an efficient way to get things done. People are in authority because of credibility, in general. And, but it is, challenging. Like we have a much more due process when it comes to law enforcement.
Right.
Basically in Japan, at least when my dad was living there in the 70s, he was telling me that, if a police officer says you did something, you did it. There's not, exactly. Well, you mentioned,
go ahead.
You mentioned people being in your ear during this electoral season. And I know that you have, made endorsements in a number of races. You've endorsed Lucy for her reelection as mayor. You've endorsed a few city council candidates. I think that you actually endorsed Eliza Kaczynski and Tim Morris in Ward 1. And so I wanted to ask you about what do you look for when you, as somebody with such insider knowledge of what the city council does and what the mayor does, what do you look for typically in these candidates when they want that endorsement?
I appreciate that question. Before I stopped being mayor, I don't think I ever co-endorsed anybody. I think I was on the track that you should just endorse one person. But
the New York Times did it, Warren and Klobuchar, which surprised me too. So yeah, I was more in that school of thought as well.
But I sort of got to a place where I thought, well, that's true, but on the other hand, you can just be saying you think either one of these people would be capable of being a decent counselor or whatever the position is, and you don't you don't pick one over the other. I will say that I feel I want to be respectful of my colleagues. But I want to say I feel like the council needs to be energized. I feel like the council needs to understand that they're leaders. They're not just a group of people who meet and somebody brings a decision that has to be made and they made it. They have the opportunity to lead on not just the mayor, but each and every one of them have the opportunity to lead on many things. If they choose to do it, it takes time, it takes energy, it takes a lot. But if you're going to be from all these different wards in a city, it seems like to me that then this is your opportunity to pick some things that you think really need some attention and work on them. And I also think sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. You know there's going to be decisions that are going to be made that are not going to be popular with maybe even half your you have to choose one to make those decisions. Sometimes it feels like it gets put off as opposed to making those decisions. But I think, for example, around the homeless issue, if the council really made a decision that they were going to land a shelter, a small shelter in each ward in the city, and they would take the heat for it, I think they could do it. So, I mean, that's just one example. And you're right. You may not get elected again, but you will have done what you thought was the right thing to do, and you do it carefully. I mean, I think with the way that we went about doing Opportunity Village was, and the community supported shelters was just right, because we wanted people to have a good experience with this. And so we probably sort of creamed the crop in terms of who those first inhabitants were. They certainly were in need of shelter, but they were probably not the toughest ones. They were probably the ones who were most able to make that transition to living with others and do it successfully. And it allowed the folks who were running those places to hone their skills. And, they, as I call Opportunity Village, it's sort of like a, what do you call it? When you have a community it's a gated community for the, for the homeless, right? It is.
Right.
So,
well, I think that it might not be like politically popular, as you say, to say, hey, we're going to have in all awards, we're going to have sort of share this burden. But the sort of alternative to that is that some neighborhoods are very affected and some are not really as effective. And, I see Bethel as having taken on, a large, if you want to use the word burden, I guess you could use that word. And for example, I was, until I was laid off, I was a shuttle driver and a valet and a bellhop at Graduate Eugene.
Mm-hmm.
I would take United pilots, but I would take, business leaders from all over the country who visit Eugene and stay with us, and I would do their 20-minute drive to and from the airport. And, I think that, Highway 99 in its current form, I view it as sort of the front porch of the airport, and it doesn't always give the most accurate impression of what Eugene is like.
And it's not a very pretty avenue into the community. On the other hand, it does have some very successful services for people in the community. And
Home Center.
Yep, and I think sponsors. I think they've done it in a way where they've built something very pleasant to look at. That is for people coming out of the prison system back into our community. Not only do they help them do it successfully and become good citizens, but it adds to the positiveness of the neighborhood. I think that's what we should seek for. I worry about right now this. There seems to be another kind of push to dump a lot of stuff at that same area because it's the easiest place. But I think it's good for everybody to have to share.
I appreciate that. I want to ask you about misconceptions about city government. When I hear you talking about having gone to China with 19 other mayors, my thought is, well, you probably had some of the least, in terms of the city charter, you probably had some of the least power out of many of those people who have, whether it's a council.
Absolute. Yeah.
Or not. Yeah, exactly.
We're not a strong mayor form of government.
No, we are not. We are a weak mayor system. So that's something that I've seen as sort of a misconception. And, I'm not personally the biggest fan of Mayor Venice's governance, but she certainly will unfortunately get a lot of people saying things like, why isn't the mayor doing this and this and this and this? And, it's not really necessarily that she has the power to do all of it.
So I heard that a lot when I was mayor, and I will say this. I think the power of a mayor in Eugene is what you make it.
Yeah.
So you do not have a wand or gavel. You can't just say something, but if you want something to happen, you have the power to put committees together to work on it. You have the power to speak to the public about it. You have the power to work on it in a whole number of ways. So, for me, one example, really controversial that happened, is when I came in as mayor. I had come in with the support of a lot of people who did not want the West Eugene Parkway to be built. I don't know if you were familiar with that, but it was like a hot issue, divided the community.
I was in 4th grade, so I was more focused on the U.S. capitals.
So it was like 20-some years of people fighting over that. And every campaign would be, where are you on that Parkway issue? And the votes were just neck and neck all the time. And so it really wasn't it felt like there was really not a direction. And it felt like we were going to fight on it forever. And so I, rightly or wrongly, I determined that there must be a better way. So I stuck my neck out. It was like dropping an atom bomb. I mean, the people who'd been investing in that area, people who had spent years in public process on that area, I understand why they were so upset. Now that a few years down the road from that, I think it was absolutely the right thing to do. But I truly do understand why, for some people, that was sort of an unforgivable thing to do, to switch direction. And so what I did is what I always do. I heard what you said. So I'm going to bring everybody together, and I'm going to bring the people who've hated each other and argued for the last 20 years, and we're going to sit down and figure out something that's going to work for smoothing traffic out in that area of town, and still not go through the wetlands. So I brought this group together, and we got outside. First of all, we couldn't get any government funding to do it. I just did it, and then got environmental groups and chamber and realtors to all pitch in to pay to do it, and then we hired something called the Osprey Group from Colorado to facilitate this big hot discussion. And out of that, I should tell you that ODOT was so mad at me, Oregon Department of Transportation.
Sure, yeah.
That a individual came and poked me in the chest and said, "Little lady, you may not like this, but this is the way it's going to be." Well, it wasn't. But anyway, that group met, and through the conversation and the work of all of those very varied people, they came to look at West Eugene in a different way. It wasn't just how to get through that awful, ugly part of town, which is the way it started out. It was, how can you make that neighborhood more livable? How can you change that whole thing? And if you watched over the last few years, there's more housing, more people living in that area. We've got, with the help of LTD, we've got bridges going between the businesses over into the neighborhood so people can move back. I mean, we got all the ingredients of this really shifting. And sidewalks. I mean, lots of sidewalks.
Yeah, crucial.
So anyway, it's not perfect yet, but these things, it's evolving. It's going in the direction that it needs to go for a more livable area. And
I love West Eugene.
Yeah,
I think it's beautiful. I love I love riding my bicycle along the bike path along the.
Me too. I like to walk along that path.
Sure. I actually I saw you and your husband. You didn't really know each other before this, so I didn't really know whether to say hi. But you were eating at Lac Yaoun.
I recognize you. Yeah.
Okay, right on. Well, I did kind of awkwardly wave, but I was like, I'm not on terms enough with these people, with David.
No, I knew you were well known a couple times to me with different places. So
sure. Well, I'm a loudmouth.
Anyway, I wanted to tell you that the Oregon Department of Transportation later came and told, and they never apologized for saying what they said, but they did say to me that they thought the bringing that group together was brilliant, and one of the and we actually had a help from the state with their they have a consensus group that works on problems in communities. They came and worked with us too, and they made me head up the rail discussion for the whole state as a result of that, because they thought I could do that discussion without everybody killing each other, because they watched me do this parkway discussion. Those folks, Mary O'Brien, really a famous environmentalist, and and then really strong conservative folks, they became really good friends and went out and spoke on how you can work together and see a different way of looking at things. They really all of them from both sides shifted from that car discussion to community discussion, to how do we want to live and what do we want to see happen that we think will be better for the people of our community. So I'm really proud of that work. And that's an example, by the way, of something that very few people will probably hear about, but it is a perfect example of the power of mayor.
Yeah.
Whether it's changing that whole discussion, whether it's being the last person standing trying to keep MX.
Sure. Oh, I remember the signs. Some of those signs were pretty not nasty.
So I everything that I did as mayor it seemed like was about that hard, and you just had to work your way through it, and you take the slings and arrows, but but then you look on the other side of it and you see okay, look at the West. I don't know about you. I don't know what your view is on MX, but I live right close to the line on 6th and 7th, and every day it's packed. That bus is less packed now because of our current circumstances, but nonetheless packed and very, very well used to go out west Eugene. So I feel like I've helped a lot of people have a mode of transportation that wasn't available to them before, and I feel good about that. So
that's great. Well, I was really glad to hear that you live in the WIT. It would have been nice to be able to do this in person. Maybe we'll do it again sometime, but
after things open up a little bit, that will be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But just from the I don't know, the spiritual sort of feeling about where the mayor is at, South Hills versus Whitaker, I don't know. For me, it just feels nice to have my mayor in the middle of the city. You kind of answered a question that I was going to ask, but I'll sort of articulate what it was going to be, which when it comes to the power of the mayor, I think that like one of the things that is that the bully pulpit and having a close relationship with Governor Brown, with Congressman DeFazio, with the U.S. senators. And so do you think that there's been any tangible way that like your voice on a federal or a state or, you mentioned with ODOT before, policy initiative or a goal was accomplished in part because of your advocacy?
So I was very fortunate to have served in the legislature before I did this job. Some people think it usually goes the other way, right? You usually start at the local and go. I did it the other way around. But I think the benefit of that is I knew everybody. So I didn't have to make friends with them. I knew them before I became mayor. So that was helpful all the time I was mayor, that I could talk to somebody or call somebody and we knew each other. And it was helpful when we lobbied for things in Salem. It was helpful when we went up to DC to try to get federal funding for things. And so those relationships are really important relationships. I think I joined, I can tell you a couple things. I joined the U.S. Conference of Mayors with other mayors in the country because they come together to work on resolutions that get taken to Congress. So I had one where what's the Keystone?
Yeah.
The pipeline?
On XL, which just faced a major blow to its construction. So that was pretty cool if you heard that.
Keystone, I had a resolution that was taken to the U.S. Conference of Mayors that was supported by mayors from all over the country. And I was the first one to do that. And and I couldn't be there because I'd been asked to speak for eWeb in New Orleans at the same time. So Gavin Newsom carried it for me.
Governor of California.
Yes.
And
then I got phone calls from Alberta. They were really mad.
Sure. I bet they were.
And I mean phone calls from their equivalent of the O'Reilly show or whatever, people who
yeah, absolutely.
So I had that, and I did another important one where I was on what is that? Sorry, can't remember it's a national radio show. Amy
Goodman, Democracy Now!
Yeah, I was on that because
nice.
I did a Bring the War Dollars Home resolution.
Right on.
I went to Sundance because I was in one of the first mayors to sign up on when the federal government wouldn't work on the climate issue. I was one of the first mayors to sign up to say we would do it at home, and we would meet the same levels of standard. And so I was invited to Sundance with Robert Redford to, I know that was fun.
The film festival, Sundance, right?
Well, I didn't go to the film festival. We went.
Okay.
We went there and heard Al Gore do an Inconvenient Truth before it was ever a film, and heard from Gusteau on the condition of the ocean, and so I mean, there's some wonderful. But those opportunities only come because you're willing to pitch in. You're willing to use your bully pulpit, and you won't. Yes, and so it gets noticed, and yeah.
Well, I know that there's somebody who you met at the airport in May 2008, who was Senator Barack Obama.
Yes.
And I got to meet him too. I always brag about it. But it was really just because he had this overflow crowd. I'll tell the story real quick because I love this experience, right? I'm a little 8th grader, and I've gone through 8 years of having a president in the White House who I think I'm smarter than, and I probably am correct about that. And so then you've got this really sharp, bright, handsome, and guy come through.
Articulate, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has this overflow crowd at the soccer practice field because it's Eugene, Oregon, and people want to see this guy. And so fit in Mac Court. So he comes out and he gives actually a pretty extensive speech. He starts off, doing the typical pandering, talking about the Ducks, talking about, how are they doing, and blah, blah, blah. But then I later come to realize he's actually a pretty big sports fan. So he was probably being a little more legitimate than some other folks might have been in that. So I just kind of snuck my way up through, and he was going down the line and shaking people's hands, and he thanked me, So
nice.
All he said to me was thank you, and I said thank you, and I just remember the feeling that his hand to me, and I swear to God, it felt like the skin on his hand was coarse, like he had been through some stuff, it was weathered. But that the flesh kind of gave a little bit Like, like underneath there was a real soul to this person and a warmth.
How interesting for you to notice that.
Absolutely. That's what I felt at the time. And I think that characterized a lot of how he governed, although, of course, I don't think he did a perfect job. But what was it like?
Well, I saw him because, when I saw him because, when he comes to town, the mayor is supposed to go and do the handshake. So I have pictures of me with doing the handshake stuff. But the most important time was I got a call, and it was after the shootings in Roseburg, and he was going to go to Roseburg, and they were a lot of people there were not going to be friendly.
No, they protested him, I think.
And so, it was a very tough time. And so they called me and they said, he's coming into the airport. We want you to be the only one to greet him, because he's just going to change from his plane to a helicopter and then go on down to Roseburg. So there won't be any speechifying. There won't be any of that kind of stuff. And I said, of course, I'd be very honored to do that. And then I thought I'd probably have about 2 minutes to say something. So I should try to do something meaningful and supportive of him, because he was going to be heading into the lion's den, so to speak. So so when he came, I was so bold, I put my hand on his arm, like patting.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just was natural.
Sure.
And told him I hope things would go well and he could take the support of all the people of Eugene with him to Roseburg. So we had this very serious moment. And then he said to me, "And what's wrong with those ducks? They're having a very bad season."
Right. Well, especially if it was football, that was maybe a couple of years.
And I said, "They'll get better, Mr. President." That's my moment to rock.
That's great.
Yeah, it was great. And then I went to, Michelle invited me to come to Washington, because I did all that work on housing homeless vets. So,
Wow.
My feeling was, as it always is, take advantage of what's sitting in front of you. So when she put out that call across the nation that they were going to work on housing all the homeless vets, I said to myself, that's where the money's going to be. That's where the attention is going to be. We certainly got a lot of them. So I should make that our deal. At that time, the county was kind of like not engaged, and I was trying to get them engaged. So I thought to myself that Pat Farr had been in the military, and it was very much something that he cared about. So I could go after him on that, from that side. And he likes being in front of people, so I thought I can go after him on that side.
He's the Lane County Commissioner for North Eugene, for people who don't.
Yeah. And so I asked him if he would co-chair an effort to house homeless vets in our area, and he and I went to a whole lot of meetings. He was very gracious and wanted to do it, and wanted to have that as a means of leadership for the county. And so then we made a promise that we would try to house, I think, 375 vets that year. And we ended up housing 475 vets that year.
Wow.
So, yeah. So I just want to say, when people say the mayoral position is what you make it, you have tools. You don't have a gavel. You do have tools. And
there's a lot of city staff. I think there's 75.
Yeah, but they don't work for me.
Sure, yeah.
They work for all of us, if you know what I mean.
Right.
If we had a strong mayor form of government, everybody that was in that office would have been somebody that I hired, but I don't. In our case, the council hires the manager, and the manager hires all the people who work for us. So my relationship with staff is one that has to be worked on all the time too, because I have to have that functioning. Don't ask for too much. Don't be too pushy. But be pushy enough. I mean, it's all that trying to keep a good balance with everything. And you feel a lot of the time kind of alone because you're not really like a counselor. You're in a very different position. Yeah. You're not part of the staff, so you're in a different position. You're in a very unique and singular, and you're by yourself quite a lot. So I had a kitchen cabinet. I think you probably know that.
Right.
I had these 6 friends. 2 of them were people who've been in public relations and graphics, and one of them was a sociology professor at the University of Oregon, and one of them was a leader in the gay rights. And those folks supported me when I first ran, but then I don't know how I was so amazingly lucky. I mean, they met with me probably every other week for 13 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And they were my kitchen cabinet, and they were smart people, and they lived in different parts of the community, so they could give me a sense of what was going on where they lived. And they never tried to tell me what to do. I would just listen to their perspectives, and they were very supportive, and it was fun to kind of be in the know. And I'm just so grateful to them because, as I said, I was very alone. And when I first came in as mayor, it was like from the one part of the community thought it was the end of the earth, and that I looked.
It was a big change. 8 years of Jim Torrey's leadership, and then to you, I think it was maybe it was even more of a, I don't want to say superficial, but people will often sort of get that exaggerated feeling of like, oh, this lefty's coming in and everything.
That's right. That's what they did.
Gonna go to heck.
I'd go to a Chamber of Commerce meeting, and everybody go to the other side of the room. It was that kind of atmosphere. I mean, it was pretty hostile because they made assumptions that because I'm liberal, and I'm very liberal, that I was going to be a certain way and treat people that I didn't agree with in a certain way, and they were wrong about that. But that's what they were concerned about. And so I had to, the first 4 years were really tough because I just had to, act like everything was fine all the time when it was just one insult after another that you just had to ride your way through, and you had to show your confidence and show people that you could do this job and not get run over. So it was, and even one of my kitchen cabinet, I mean, he was threatened. His business was threatened.
Wow.
So it was rough. It was very, very rough.
Does the mayor of Eugene, when I think of an executive leader, like a governor leading a legislature, or being the executive of the legislature, or the president and having the Congress, like I think a lot of their responsibility is to call people up and get the votes that are needed to get something to pass. With an 8-person city council, does that characterize some of your role as well? If there's something you really wanted for an ordinance,
learn to do in the legislature, count to 5. Mm-hmm. You count to the majority. You don't have to get everybody. You just have to get.
Yeah.
So I usually, I never twisted an arm ever. It was just, I would ask them and talk to them individually, and then I'd count. And if I knew we were ready to go, then I knew we were ready to go. And that worked for the most part. That worked pretty well. I will say there were some issues, like the Willamette Street stuff where the council switched direction 3 or 4 times. It made it for me, very difficult to deal with. But
sure.
I should say respectfully, because I've said I wanted them to do more, to be bigger leaders and stuff. But you gotta appreciate anybody who runs for office, anybody who has that amount of time and interest on the part of their community. You have to give them at least so many chits for that, and every one of them has strengths that are very helpful and useful. And some of them, the strength is they just say it like it is. I mean, that's a strength too, right? So everybody brings something to the occasion, and as you look out there, you see that many of them actually do. You might not agree with them, but they represent where they live, or at least a good portion of where they live. So I always felt that I had to respect them because I was respecting the people of our community. So anyway, I want to be gracious about this because I just want to say I was frustrated sometimes, but I'm not. I don't think badly of anybody.
That's good. Mm-hmm. That's good that you have that. I think it's sincere when you say it too. Some people aren't as sincere when they say those niceties. But
Mike Clark and I don't agree on two things, but but we do agree on having a sense of humor. So we just kind of jabbed each other a little bit all the time, but in a very friendly way. And
and he sure gets a lot of hate. Mike has been very kind to me. I've developed a bit of a relationship with Counselor Semple, with Counselor Taylor's been really kind to me, and Clark has also been really kind to me. And that's very appreciated because I'm a harsh critic sometimes.
Right.
Can I ask you two more questions, even though we're a little over an hour?
Sure.
Gracious. Okay. Well, on the topic of, I guess, criticism and vitriol, you're very active on Facebook with your Facebook profile, your personal account. You don't run a page, do you? I don't think you run like a public figure page. I think you just run.
I did when I was mayor.
Oh, you did? Okay. Well,
I did when I was mayor, but it's very different now. When I
what I was going to ask you is, do you think people are in general better engaged with the issues now because of the social media accessibility, or do you think it can distort issues, oversimplify things a little too much?
All of the above.
Yeah, I figured.
So this is an interesting thing. I had a maximum number on my Facebook all the time I was mayor, with a big waiting list. But I had to take an attitude that as mayor, if somebody disagreed with me, they could be there. I didn't ever knock any. The only time I got rid of anybody is when they just were obscenely nasty or something. They just weren't doing it. But when I stopped being mayor, I sent something out to everybody and said, "Hey, I'm not a mayor anymore. So if you don't like me, you can leave now." And in fact, you all might want to get off now. It's fine.
Yeah.
and nobody left.
Yeah.
So we keep having these conversations about what's going on in the city on a regular basis. I think that we all know we're being messed with a little bit by Facebook itself in terms of who we connect with and who we don't connect with. But it's hard for me to keep up with that stuff. But I think the limitations they themselves put on your accounts are something to be thought about. I thought Marilyn, one of my kitchen captains, the one who taught me into doing Facebook. I probably would not have done it otherwise. And I'm so glad I did, because just you touch so many people you would never touch otherwise, and you have conversations you would never have otherwise. And for me, I kind of learned how to put issues out there and just let people talk, so that I didn't say I know the answer and I want you to agree with me. I just said, here's here's the issue, here's what one side says, here's what another side says, and just let them have at it. And they really seem to like that.
Yeah. I think that's a great role to take on. All right, I'll ask you the last question, which is the question I ask everybody on this podcast. It's an aggressive question, but you don't even have to answer it, in exactly the way that I might want or my listeners might want. But gosh, okay, I feel like because you're Kitty Piercy, I have to preface this a little bit more than I typically would. I think of myself as a fairly intelligent person and a well-educated person, but I also think that I'm as susceptible to just about anybody to the stupidity that's out there. Mm-hmm. There is, and we talked about social media can be a way that amplifies things that are not credible or that can pull on our negative instincts, right? So I don't think it's enough. This show is called Less Stupid because I don't think it's enough to just be smart. And I think that's kind of boring and uninspiring. I think we have to actively reject stupidity as much as possible. What is one way that you think we could all be a little less stupid?
I don't even like the word stupid, but okay.
I figured you would say that.
I think we underestimate ourselves and what we can bring to conversation and each other when we are not open to each other. I think being open to each other and listening hard to everybody can't help but make you grow and improve who you are and improve how you interact with the world around you.
I appreciate that. Well, I always try to frame it because it is a provocative title, but I try to frame it as like, this is my own journey towards becoming a less stupid version of my past self, because I know how silly I've been in the past. So it's not as though, here I am on a high horse saying that I'm smart.
Well, I think there's several things that I carried with me that might be interesting before you leave. One is when I was mayor, I said to myself, I have to have something that helps me when things are hard. So one of the things I had was I said to myself, don't let them make you mad because they're getting a piece of you they didn't deserve to have. Yeah. So, and that really helped me because you could feel somebody pulling on you and you want to snap back. And then I learned to think on a regular basis that if I snap back, who's going to get hurt? Me. Not that person. They're getting what they want. They just want you to respond
and kind of validate that they had that perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I just think that being open and not letting things pull you to your lesser self is really hard, but important work in this world. And I think human beings are just works in progress.
We're mammals.
Yeah, I think.
Look at the chimps. I think we have a lot in common with them.
I think we'll always be working on things. So anyway, thanks for the thanks for the conversation.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure and an honor. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Kitty Piercy.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.